All right, let's get started. So hi everyone, my name is Amina Patton. I am an educator partnerships manager here at Course Hero. I'm a part of the educator team that puts on this lovely event that we're so happy that you're joining us for. And I'm really excited to be moderating today's session on what should a culture of caring look like in higher education, which is a panel of students and educators. Before I let our panelists introduce themselves, I wanted to give a couple of notes. Firstly, we are going to have some time for questions at the end, so please use the Q&A function. You should see a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom to submit any questions that you have. Feel free to have free and open conversation in the chat. We want everyone to be engaged with what we're going to be discussing today, as well as with each other. So I'm going to turn the mic over to our panelists. And how about Cynthia? You kick us off with introductions.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. My name is Cynthia Van Golen. My PhD is in neuroscience, but I'm currently an associate professor in biological sciences at Delaware State University in Dover, Delaware.
Hi, everybody. Gabriella McBride here. I am working at NYU. I recently received my doctorate in social work at NYU and working there to launch a new project to specifically train school social workers. My work is on dialogue and caring communities in higher ed.
Thank you. Eliana?
Hi, everyone. My name is Eliana McCrae. I am a graduate of Delaware State University. I got my bachelor's degree in forensic biology with a minor in chemistry, and I am currently a prep program mentee at the University of Michigan.
Perfect. And last but not least, Yvette.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining you from Brooklyn, New York. I am Yvette Sierra. I'm a recent graduate from NYU Silver School of Social Work, where I got my master's, and I'm currently working towards my licensure to be a social worker.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. I'm so excited to see people introducing themselves in the chat. And to kind of kick us off, when we talk about what a culture of caring looks like, I thought it would make sense for us to do a little bit of reflection. So can any of you describe a time where you felt cared for, either as a student or as a teacher? Gabriella, how about you get us started?
I was just going to unmute myself. Thank you, Amina. I think most recently, I felt cared for when a professor reached out to my doctoral cohort before the course started to find out a little bit about us, sent us a survey and said, tell me a little bit about who you are, what you've been working on, what you would like to see in our classroom, kind of, touching base on our learning needs. And I like that it was a reflective exercise before, so we could tell them a little bit of where we were. And then I felt really cared for when we went to class the first time and they were able to summarize what we had said as a community and how that was going to move our class forward.
Absolutely. Has anyone else had kind of similar experiences with faculty that helped them feel cared for, as a student?
I was going to say this past semester, I had an experience where I felt cared for by my students. I had been gone for a couple of class periods, going to medical schools around the area. And when I came back, at the end of class, I had so many students coming up to tell me their news, to find out how things went, just to check in. And it really made me feel very cared for as a faculty member, that they made a point to come up and check in and talk at the end of class.
That's amazing. Yeah, I always love those moments of connections with students, that they see you and appreciate you in that way. How about our student panelists? Anything you'd like to share?
I can go. So for me as a student, it's when like you're just having not the best week and a teacher notices like a change in how you normally act, or like the quality of your work, which I really appreciate, because you kind of just feel like a cog in the machine sometimes. So the fact that you notice that something's a little bit off is like really nice.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? I think there's a commonality across what everyone's talking about awareness, right? And just being noticed and observed. And so that kind of gets to my second question around what qualities have to be present for you to feel supported. So if we think about those instances that you all reflected upon, what do you think were those things that helped you feel supported in those moments?
I'll go ahead and start off this one because I think I can bridge the two, the feeling cared for and the qualities. I'm a stickler for language and just how subtle shifts can really change the meaning. And so one thing that I know has really been important for me has been the shift from feeling like a faculty cared for versus caring with. And so the times in which I have felt like faculty cared with or a professor showed up in a way that made me feel like we were caring with was when we talked about the difference between solidarity and charity, and this idea that building a culture of caring is a mutual process that is mutually beneficial. And so when professors have been really open and honest about the fact that caring for each other and caring with is something that benefits us as students and them as professors, I have felt really seen, really secure, and really invested in continuing to pour into the classroom. Thank you.
I really loved how you phrased that. And I think it builds upon or kind of points towards what I want to get at to next, because in this panel, we have people who are teacher and faculty relationships, right? And so when you talk about caring with, right, what it looks like for it to be done together, how have you done that together as student and teacher? What does that look like for you in your relationships, either Cynthia and Eliana or Gabriella and Yvette?
Well,
I can jump in here. Oh.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thanks, Cynthia. I can jump in because I took a couple of notes to this question because I think it's important I think one of the ways Yvette and I have done it is by being transparent with our classroom community around our relationships. So, the MSW track of program is usually 2 years, right? From beginning to end. And so it's 4 semesters. People do it differently, but the traditional program is 4 semesters. And Yvette and I were in class together 3 out of the 4 semesters. And also, for a little bit of time, I also supervised them in the work that they were doing out in practicum. And so that last semester of class, right, we were all together approaching graduation, having some very interesting conversations with the classroom community about supervision, about self-disclosure. And Yvette and I touched base and we decided that we were going to share with the class how many layers of relationship the 2 of us had to the classroom community as a way to be transparent, right? To be honest with the classroom community and also to create a community within the classroom where they felt like they could also share some of what was happening for them. And I don't know, Yvette, how you felt about that moment, but I felt that the decision, right, to disclose and to share that information about kind of where we were helped move the classroom community together because they were able to take that modeling behavior of vulnerability, of sharing, of transparency, and bring it into the classroom. And so that's just kind of something that came to mind in terms of our work together.
Absolutely. I feel like you said a lot of what I was going to say in a lot more of a concise way. So I really appreciate 100%. I think that the modeling was also really key.
So I think for me, I had decided a couple of years ago to abolish the feeling of us versus them in my classroom, and kind of that there was this barrier and that we were all collaborating in education. And so what I've really appreciated with Ileana in particular, but several students like her, is the fact that there's a trust there that goes both ways, that we can sit in my office and have conversations where we're both sharing, and that really deepens that ability to talk about issues that have arisen, in education or in life. And that's been very important to me as an educator.
Eliana, anything you want to add or build upon from your perspective of working with Cynthia in that way?
Yeah, so that's a big thing. It's like having that trust to be able to tell her like things that are going on. Also, I would say the best way to, it's like there has to be that nurturing that's done beforehand so you feel comfortable to be able to share things like that. that was like the biggest thing I was going to say, actually. So.
And I'm curious then, if we can elaborate a little bit more on specifically how then that feeling of nurturing or care, how that even is constructed. So Cynthia, you mentioned kind of breaking down that barrier, that us versus them feeling. I know I felt that when I was in the classroom. So how did you approach that to actually demonstrate to the students that they could kind of approach you in that way or feel comfortable with you in that way? Were there any specific strategies or approaches that you used to build up that kind of environment with your students?
So I think the first thing is I started every single class period, I start with a 2-word check-in with my students, kind of how are you doing? Really, you know, if we're talking about creating a culture of care, showing that I care about who they are and how they're doing. And sometimes it's difficult to get people to share, but really by the end, they're just whipping out exactly, you know, how they feel. And there are times when we've had to explore that a little bit, you know, why are you feeling this way? You know, what's happening, so that we can kind of clear that and get in. And I think that students appreciate being seen, you know, just as we want to be seen by our colleagues and our administrators, you know, our students want to be seen by us. I have this quote up on my phone right now because I saw it today, that people need one thing more than anything else, the reassurance that they are a priority. And so I think if we demonstrate to our students that they really are our priority, by our intentions, by being present, by focusing on them in the moment, that then hopefully we can nurture that relationship so that they feel, one, ready to learn in the classroom, but then two, that they can come to us after.
Absolutely, and I love that quote. I think that's a really succinct way to put it. And I guess, Gabby, I would ask similarly for you, what are some of the kind of ways, specific strategies that you leverage for your classes to kind of incorporate that care into your teaching? I know for you, it feels like it's embedded, I think, in everything, you know, from the beginning. So if I'm thinking about some of the folks that are in the audience, of thinking about what are the things that they can start to add if they are trying to kind of build up that sense of caring and that sense of community with their students.
Whew. I think, let me take a breath. Cynthia, I love that quote as well. I wanted to just make a note of that. Do you mind, I mean, if I take this question like 2 different ways? One of the things that came up as Cynthia and you were sharing, and then also before Yvette, when you brought in this idea of width, is that I ground my teaching practice in restorative practices, which really, you know, there's a lot written on it. And in essence is about, you know, treating people with humanity and getting to know people as human beings. And so, and also I really ground in this idea of working with someone, because when you're working with someone and you're alongside them, right, whether it's students in a course that I'm teaching or whether it's with people I'm working with, you know, as a social worker, when you're alongside someone, you're giving them a lot of support, right? And you are also holding them to very high expectations. I always use this like parenting example of like, if I always put my daughter's socks on first, she's never going to learn how to put her socks on herself, right? And so I care for her by putting her socks on, but I also care for her by teaching her how to put the socks on herself. And so I kind of take that into my teaching practice, and, you know, alongside my students from the beginning, let them know that like I am here to support you, and I also have very high expectations for you because I expect you, right, to learn the material, to grow as a social worker, to develop your professional identity, and to learn how to practice with marginalized communities that really, really benefit, right, from the work that social workers do. And so one of the ways, you know, you asked me about very concrete strategies, I spend a lot of time on the beginning of my syllabus and think about like how the beginning of my syllabus is conveying some of my why, right, and how I am intending to show up in the space. And then I'm often using tools to audit my syllabus to make sure that I'm using inclusive language. There's an equity syllabus review tool that I like to use. I think I popped into one of our documents, Amina, if you wanted to share it, but it really encourages you to review your syllabi on a regular basis to make sure that you're conveying kind of your grounding, and also making sure that you're using inclusive and equitable language. And so kind of thinking about from the beginning, how do I do that? And then one more thing is really make a point of just getting to know students before they walk in the door, right? Even if that's like knowing names, knowing faces, getting information from people. I always ask students to submit a favorite song or two. So I kind of have a class playlist and we can like jam together in the beginning of class, right? Like there's ways for students to be able to bring their identity forwards from the beginning in a way that feels, you know, like something they can do and allows them to connect in a very human way. Back to that restorative practice idea.
Absolutely. So, and I love the that you mentioned music. That was a way in for me as well. With my students, a way for us to connect. They could share, I could share, and there's like a whole different conversation that's happening with them that allows them to go, you know what, I will show up and have this conversation with this person. I think they get me. And so now I'm curious of how maybe you have adjusted any strategies. Excuse me. Maybe there's something that you tried in an effort, you know, to demonstrate some care, maybe based on feedback from students that you had to make some adjustments or some things weren't as effective, or if you were working in a different modality. We talked about that a little bit earlier in our summit today about the differences that can happen when you're online, when you're on hybrid. So if we're thinking about creating a culture of care, no matter where we are, if we're physically in front of our students or not, what are some of the ways, and this is for Cynthia and Gabby, but also for you, Eliana and Yvette, to think about what does that look like when we're in different spaces? What are some of the adjustments that we may need to make to ensure that that feeling of care for our students is actually being communicated and resonating with them, regardless of how we're connecting or how we're meeting? Get some love for that tool that you shared, Gabby. So were there things that you had to adjust for creating that sense of connection with your students when you were working in different modalities?
So I'll take this one. You know, when we pivoted to online, but then afterwards, having some classes online and some in person, it takes a lot more intention online to really get to know students. And in particular, we have a policy on campus where we cannot force students to turn on their cameras. That was instituted university-wide when we did the COVID pivot. And so we all know that it's a more difficult, we had that conversation in the keynote today, right? It's a more difficult to get to know people when you can't see them. So really being intentional with things like discussion boards, with, you know, having them share video, if, you know, using things like Flip, you know, to really have them share some video, you know, just anything that you can do to get to know students in that way, since you're not seeing them in the classroom. What I still struggle with is getting the feedback that we normally get from students in the classroom about whether they're getting it or not. And that's still a struggle of mine, you know, in the online format.
And I'm curious, Eliana and Yvette, for you, if you had experiences with kind of online courses, were there things that worked well that you found were effective, or things that you wish faculty who are working in those modalities that you wish they knew that maybe could help them when they're trying to connect with their students and they have to do it through a screen?
I can kind of speak on that. So for me, I'm a huge nerd, so I liked online classes, but I've had teachers offer extra credit if you turn on your camera, just so they can like get that, I don't know, like give an incentive for them to see your face. But also the class was enjoyable, so I wanted to show them that I cared. So it was definitely like the environment called for it. So it was definitely, I really want to show them that I like this class and I want them to know that I care about what they're doing. So it was definitely that type of thing. But yeah, yeah.
No, I think that's great. And I think it speaks to what we've been talking about, like the nature of how that class was structured worked so well for you that you're like, I want to do this. The incentive is nice, but it was more than that as to why you wanted to kind of demonstrate and show that you actually cared, which I'm sure they really appreciated. Yvette, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I genuinely feel that ultimately it comes down to the subject matter and the teaching style. So I had a good amount of online classes this past semester compared to the previous one, which was almost entirely in person. And I know that I had been leaning heavily towards online courses just with the ongoing pandemic and also the commuting in New York and the cost of commuting. And also just to me, it's more convenient to connect remotely. There is a stark difference between professors who emphasize lecturing and, talking at students as opposed to talking with students. And so that would be evident in the classroom just as it would be remotely. So teachers like Gabby who emphasize discussions and have us break out into groups, then that would translate well to Zoom where we could have breakout rooms. But professors who tend to focus on PowerPoints and reading slides at you would also do that more on Zoom. And so ultimately, I think that the discussion between online versus in person for me isn't as strong of a difference versus professors who lecture versus professors who have discussions. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. No, I think you're right. The tools, they're only as great as how we use them, right? To leverage and to amplify what it is that we're doing in our classroom. So I think that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. So now I'm thinking, if we're talking about these different kind of approaches, what kind of tips would you give to faculty if they're really struggling to meet the needs of their students? What are some of the things that you think would be useful for them to try or approaches for them to take if they're really kind of struggling with this, the way to really connect with their students in a meaningful way?
So wonderful question. I would say start off by asking. So I think that curiosity is a really important component of care, and expressing curiosity consistently with your students and also encouraging curiosity is really important. I think that it's the kind of thing where as much as I love being a student and part of one of these panels, I also know that each student's need is going to be so different versus whether it's how they learn, what they want to learn, why are they here, but also what are the conditions that are making it hard for them to show up? Is it socioeconomic? Is it interpersonal? Is it political? Is it physical? Is it like there's so many layers? And so I think that the question would be ask your students, what do you need? But also asking yourself, what do I need? What are the barriers that are getting in the way for me to show up as the professor that I want to show up? And having that be a conversation that everyone is a part of.
That was extremely well put. Thank you. Does anyone have anything else they want to build upon? And just to reiterate to the audience, we will be taking questions at the end, so feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we will get to them, I promise. Gabby, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think in addition to what Yvette is saying, what I would add is the importance of self-reflection. I just read an article from 1995, which is like probably before many people here, not here, but like, I don't know, some people were born. So it's an older article, but it emphasizes how important it is as instructors to be constantly reflecting. And so, yes, right. I absolutely agree with Yvette that the importance of, asking for feedback, having conversations, figuring out what is going on is key, right? And is instrumental. And also the self-reflection that comes along with that. And so I just would encourage instructors, and what I've done in the past is just kind of before having that conversation with students to be like, what's going on here, right? Why aren't we connecting? Sitting back and being like, okay, so what is my contribution to this? Because the article I read even breaks down like the process of sitting in a circle and talks about how so many instructors feel like setting a circle up in the classroom is a way to show a community of care and to have an inclusive learning environment. And ultimately, it is not for every student, and it can make some students feel very uncomfortable. And so, kind of stepping back and critically reflecting, well, what have I done? How have I communicated, right? What I want to communicate with my students, right? Where could I have possibly kind of misstepped? How does my identity and how I'm showing up around the material and around who I am in the classroom and around who my students are impacting also kind of our relationship and our working with, right, each other. And so I think both are equally as important, as well as mentorship. I feel like I'm an adjunct. I've been an adjunct for years, right? Until 6 weeks ago when I took a full-time job at NYU. But kind of that adjunct life, encouraging people who are adjunct instructors to always find mentorships and communities of teaching and learning where they can come together and talk about teaching practice and grow in their teaching practice, or have opportunities to, reflect on who they are and their teaching philosophy is just really, really important as well.
Yeah, I would tag on to that. That reflection is so key, and realizing that every single semester, even if you're teaching the same class, it's a different set of students. You may be different, and just recognizing that things may have to be different from one semester to the next, and being open to that, being adaptable, realizing that there isn't only one way. And I think that's really important for caring for your students, because, we know that education is changing so rapidly. And now, there are going to be sessions at the Education Summit on AI. So we know that that's going to change things. Our students have just come through a difficult time, and some are undergoing many mental health challenges, so we really just have to be adaptable and reflect every single semester, sometimes weeks within the semester, about how we can do things better.
Absolutely. I think I completely agree with everyone's comments on that question. And it kind of leads me to this next one. This one specifically for Eliana and Yvette. What is something that you wish faculty understood about students?
I can go. So starting off with like an example of kind of like what not to do is, don't think of your class as the only one that we're taking, because I've had teachers like pile on homework, not really have a regard for anything other than their class. And that's not super helpful, especially if their class is a harder class and then you're taking other classes on top of it. So just be mindful of the fact that we're taking other classes. I promise it's not like personal, but like it's a lot going on. Another thing is that I used to go to a community college, and something that they did because the department was smaller was that they would like sit down and talk to each other about when they would have stuff coming up due. So just like sitting down and I guess talking with your colleagues, like, oh, do you have a test that day? Oh, well, I have a project that day. Maybe we should switch something like that. It's super easy, and it shows that you care, because like I said, it's a lot, especially if you're taking harder, higher level classes. So that would just be my my thing. Just be mindful, please.
And I'll just piggyback off that, or maybe expand the idea that I wish that students and faculty both knew more about what we had going on outside the classroom. Seeing the classroom as this container, which we had the opportunity and honestly the obligation to build a culture of caring and to learn and grow. And outside that container, all of us have our own lives. And one thing about New York, where I'm currently located, that I am really excited about is this recent law that passed, in which jobs looking for prospective employees need to have transparency over salary. And that's something that, translating into the classroom as far as transparency over where each of us is at, just socioeconomically, I think could be an important bridge towards some semblance of equity, because I wish that more students knew just how little professors, adjuncts make. I wish students knew just how many other jobs, oftentimes, how many other responsibilities professors have, and vice versa. I wish students knew more, or that faculty knew that a lot of the students, have different situations at home that interfere with them showing up and giving their all in the classroom, whether it's other classes, other jobs, supporting a family, supporting themselves, overlapping barriers. And so I just wish that there was more transparency, and that there was less shame around being upfront over these things, and more just overall vulnerability.
I remember, Yvette, like last year in one of our first courses together, you really appreciated the transparency around textbook costs and other ways to access a textbook. Exactly to your point, Yvette, kind of that transparency around like the social work textbook that I'm asking you to get or have access to is really $88, and that is expensive. Or even a $12 textbook is expensive. And so, what does that mean? And conveying that from the beginning.
Absolutely. That for me was a green flag. The professors that had bended the rules and provided links or resources to get the text, to me, that as an educator, I know that that will be something that I will take on regardless of what the institution's rules and protocols are. I think that education should be as affordable or free, and so might as well do what we can.
And just to Eliana, and then I'll stop. But Eliana, you that point about deadlines, I recently went to a workshop and they were like, why do we put 11:59 p.m. as a deadline on assignments? Because so many instructors do it. And like the instructor for the instructor course said, challenged us to be like, are you even up at 11:59? Like, why do you need papers or assignments submitted at that time if you are asleep for 3 hours? Like, think about the discrepancy in message. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, yeah, that's ridiculous. I'm not doing my students any favor by saying 11:59. Like, submit it when you want to submit it, right? With like an approximate deadline, or like 6 o'clock the next morning, because that's actually when I'm going to be up and maybe looking at your papers. So really thinking about some of these arbitrary kind of timestamps we put on things as we teach to make ourselves feel more kind of contained, when really, kind of, stepping in and listening to where our students are, like Eliana said.
I'll piggyback on that. My own children, who are all grown now, my youngest is still in, well, my youngest two are still in college. And they told me I was so cruel for setting deadlines for assignments on Sunday night at 11:59. And they said, why Sunday night? And I was like, thinking, okay, I could make it Monday. And I told my class and they applauded. They're like, we can actually ask you questions then on Monday, before the assignments due, if you make it due Monday night. And so I was like, okay, I don't care. One more day is not bad for me.
And I think that really speaks to what you were talking about earlier about that moment of reflection, right? So I really question, especially when we talk about this a lot, around the tools that we use and maybe the defaults that are set that some of us don't question. So a lot of times I remember my LMS 11:59 was the default. And so unless you question it, or like Yvette mentioned, ask your students, like, does that actually make sense? Does that work for you? And then to challenge it and try different things and see what is actually going to be the most effective for their learning, and not just rushing toward the completion of a task. And so before we open it up for Q&A, because we do have some questions coming in for the audience, I want us to kind of wrap up with being a little idealistic, right? So if higher ed actually had a culture of caring that prevailed, what would that look like to you? Like if everything was how you would envision it to be in a perfect world, and there was this culture of caring across all of higher education, what would that look like?
I mean, first and foremost, just gonna say it, faculty should be paid like 10 times more. School should be free. Just gonna, that to start off. The stress of how am I going to pay for school should not be in the forefront of my mind as a student, and the stress of how am I going to pay my rent should not be in the forefront of faculty. And that alone, I think, would make a huge difference in how we show up. I think that students would constantly reflect on their why. Why am I here? Why am I pursuing this? What is my passion? How did I end up in this classroom? Even if this specific class is a specific required course, it doesn't make my heart sing. how can I use this classroom as an opportunity for growth anyway? And same goes for faculty, you know, what can I get out of this classroom? How can I leave this semester knowing that I grew too? And so just constantly reflecting would be a huge part of it.
You got lots of hearts and applause with your comments, by the way, Yvette, just so you know. Anybody else? What would it look like for you if higher ed had a culture of caring?
I would just love to have an openness for sharing of ideas. You know, the way that we perceive academia is going to be when we enter it, either as students or as faculty, and just having kind of this open dialogue continuously. And yes, that takes time, and we don't have a lot of that, but really just being able to share ideas with our students, have our students feel free to share their ideas with us, being able to share those ideas with other colleagues, with administrators, you know, and kind of help higher education be what we all idealized it to be.
Eliana or Gabby, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say definitely having an openness, because there have been situations where I'll be in my research lab and I say something to my mentor and she'll be like, oh, that's actually a good idea. Let me implement that. And it's like just being able to listen and be receptive, because you realize that you're talking to someone who's like a teacher is talking to a student who like in turn goes and talks to their students. Like I may not take your class, but I know the students in your class or something like that. So just having the openness to listen and say, oh, well, maybe this is a good idea. Let me try. Definitely what Dr. Van Golen was saying too, but like definitely having an openness and like just nurturing that environment of being able to listen to one another for sure.
Gabby, any thoughts you want to share before we open it up to audience questions?
I was thinking about the parallel process. So as a social worker, I really believe that kind of the way professors are treated will influence, and if professors are treated with care or the instructors are treated with care, that will translate into the classroom. So I was thinking about ways of creating care among people who are instructing. And so I would love to see more, you know, teaching and learning opportunities, you know, opportunities for communities to come together to discuss like this, right? To discuss the practice of teaching, to build communities, to have maybe mentors in the field who've been teaching for a long time that you could go to and say, like, I want to create a culture of care. I want to do this in the classroom, or I want to use, you know, PowerPoint in a way that's effective for students, and also to have learning, and also, you know, deliver the content, and also create a culture of care. Like bring forward some of these difficult conversations that we're wrestling with. We even, everybody's talking in the chat about deadlines and grading and like what that means. And I would love to see more communities and discussions among instructors around some of these topics, because I think creating that strength in instructors will then translate into students. And then I was also thinking, in social work school, we're always running out of time. Or maybe that's a me problem, but I'm always running out of time. And so I would love to see the courses extended a little bit, like why an hour and 50 minutes, just give me 2 hours with students. And so we can spend a little bit more time and not have that quite as much tension between content and community and discussion.
Yeah, I had the luxury of being in art and design classes that were often 3 hours, and yet we still ran out of time. So I think it happens sometimes. We do have some questions coming in for the chat, so I want to try to get to as many of them as I can. This one from Lucy Parrish, I think is kind of interesting. So it's collaborating with students in the education process seems to be a wonderful theme emerging from this session. I agree. So how can we collaborate with students in their own education while not placing a burden on them to over-prepare or to do our jobs for us? Cynthia, you like you're about to say something. Go ahead.
So I think if you start the collaborative process with offering a couple of choices where you've thought out these choices, but then the students have the opportunity to, to weigh in on those choices. The way you're not putting everything on them. Oh, we'll come up with what assignments you want to do, but it's more, I'm not trying to say anything against students here, but when you have a toddler and you offer them, do you want juice or milk, right? That kind of starts that whole discussion, right? And so the same thing I think is true with students, and then as they get older, I think, or more mature in their education, I guess I should say, then the collaboration becomes easier because they've had time to develop as a student, had time to explore some of these things on their own in their major, and then can offer more options for you.
And we have another question that I think, thank you for your response, Cynthia, that I think kind of speaks to, I think, a lot of what I've heard from faculty, that they're experiencing, that there's this balance that they're trying to strike between being open and being flexible, also making sure that learning objectives are met and that they're being aware of what students may be going through that is kind of beyond their control. So whether it's the course load that they are required to take, maybe to, maintain their financial aid, or things that are happening outside of classes. So when you're thinking about striking a balance between kind of flexibility and structure, how do you kind of think about that or approach that? And what have you found to be, I guess, effective, if the students would like to chime in terms of finding that balance?
I think there's nuance to this response. As someone who has a pretty hard science background and also studied the fine arts and now has a degree in social work, I've noticed that having structure for some subjects is crucial. Like organic chemistry, yes, there are certain, competencies that you absolutely must meet in order to be successful. And if you're too flexible, then you might actually potentially be harming the students because they'll have to make up for it in the next level of organic chemistry, right? When it comes to the arts, or where it comes to social work or just different subjects, I do think that having flexibility is a lot more feasible. And also, again, remembering your why is crucial. Like I know that in grad school, I wrote some of the best papers I ever have written. And in big part, it was because I didn't meet a single deadline. My professors were really flexible, and I would reach out and I would say, hey, I'm fascinated by this. I'm really passionate about this. And I need more time because I want to write a better paper. Then, if I hand this in now at 11:59 p.m., it's going to be trash. And so just being really open and honest with yourself as a professor and as a student, like what is the why and how flexible can I really be? I think that we're told that we need to have a really firm structure, and it's not this binary.
Absolutely. I think that's a great, go Gabby, you can give us our last note before we close out.
Oh, goodness. I think what I would add to that is just always put it in context, right? So again, to Yvette's point about the profession, like in social work, in the social work profession, we are often required to be innovative and to take initiative and to develop and to assess. Like we are often kind of managing our own schedules because that's how the profession operates. And so I think also kind of knowing your profession and laying that out transparently for students from the beginning of like, well, I might be flexible with assignments because, right, I want you to honor your learning. So Yvette, if there is a topic that you really want to explore, come to me and tell me, because I want you to take initiative on exploring something you want to explore, and kind of connecting the dots and framing it around the bigger purpose of like this educational outcome, I think is really important. And same thing with like this timeline, right? Of like, yes, I'm going to extend this timeline because, right? And kind of always putting it in context and really being purposeful and like connecting it to your values as an educator. I think it's so important to like remain connected to who we are as educators and like have students know our why.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today. As to our panelists, thank you, thank you, thank you. Everyone in the chat, thank you so much for all your questions and great dialogue. We dropped the link to the agenda in the chat for you to head to your next session. Summit's not over yet. So I hope you find even more things that inspire you as a teacher. And thank you so much for joining our session today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.